Well, Youth Over Guns is a youth-led advocacy group formed by students of color after the mass shooting in Parkland, Florida. In the aftermath of the Parkland shooting and this national outcry for gun violence prevention solutions, their mission to reduce gun violence with a focus on policy as well as community-based solutions in saving lives, particularly in communities of color. The organization is raising awareness for young people of color and underserved communities who have been impacted by gun violence and the epidemic at disproportionate rates to demand evidence-based safety measures, as well as schools and communities that are more effective than policing, prosecution, and incarceration. And joining us to give us a little bit more insight, we are joined by the Director of Youth Outreach and Engagement, Alliyah Logan. And Alliyah, good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about this, because I think a lot of us can look at key moments and say this was a seminal moment in getting active and involved. When we look at the death of George Floyd, another seminal moment got all of America involved in a new kind of way. But talk to us about how the Parkland shooting actually affected your organization.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for that. As you all know, like you said, we were founded after the Parkland shooting, but we weren't necessarily founded because I think there was a wave of youth activism after that. But a lot of Black and Brown organizers have been doing the work from a very young age. And I think we really were founded just because we had to fill that void in the narrative, because a lot of the conversation was solely on white students who lived in affluent neighborhoods who were impacted by mass shootings, in comparison to a lot of students who are in Youth Over Guns, where it was Black and Brown people being killed in cities or just in low-income communities, and our narrative was never being shared, and it was pushed out of the conversation of the gun violence prevention movement, although we've been doing this work for an extremely long time. And by we, I mean a lot of Black and Brown youth who have been doing this work from a young age, from the ages of like 12, 13 to 14, in comparison to other students who just got involved after the Parkland shooting. So for us, it was really important to make sure that, one, we had our voices in the room, because a lot of the times, if we weren't in the room and if other Black and Brown students weren't in the room, there wasn't anyone sharing that narrative of how gun violence impacts Black and Brown people at such a disproportionate rate, and even how police violence is gun violence, and making those connections and intersections between different systems. And I think a lot of Youth Over Guns work is focusing on the intersections of different systems. So we don't even just focus on gun violence. We also look at the disproportionate rates of access to resources in the education system, and looking at how schools in underprivileged neighborhoods don't have the same educational resources as those in others. And a lot of times, students are militarized and they have metal detectors in schools and school resource officers in schools, and really looking at how that all intersects and impacts gun violence differently than it impacts white Americans in this country. So Youth Over Guns is really founded on ensuring that Black and Brown people, especially young Black girls, have a voice in this movement to be able to share their experiences with gun violence, and even looking and understanding the intersections of other systems.
Yeah, and let me ask you about the gun violence situation, because a lot of people will talk about, okay, Black on Black crime, gun violence continues to be pervasive in a lot of communities. But from your perspective, what's the conversations being had, like particularly with young people, when it comes to addressing this issue of gun violence? Because if we listen to some narratives, it's like youth are just not even with it in terms of being checked into speaking on the matter. But I know different. There are a lot of youth that really have some very critical voices and are really some great influencers who really want to speak against this really big problem that's pervading our society.
Yeah, and like you said, I think a lot of times people assume that young people aren't involved with the issue, and that we're just going to sit back and allow for things to occur without speaking up or advocating for ourselves. When in reality, there's a lot of young people, even outside of Youth Over Guns, and a lot of Black and Brown people who have been advocating for gun violence prevention for a really long time now. And in Youth Over Guns, our mother organization is New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, and they have a reaction program. And in that reaction program, they actually go in high schools in New York City and they teach students about just paying to advocacy and how they can use the power in their voice, because a lot of times students in in our area and our neighborhoods feel like um, that having a gun and holding a gun holds so much power in life in comparison to using their own voice. So the reaction program is really founded on ensuring that young people understand the power that is their voices hold, and the power of even lobbying at Capitol Hill or advocating for different gun violence prevention laws to be put in place to directly change their community. So with the conversation of gun violence prevention, I think people, especially people my age, like 16 to 18, are really like looking at not only gun violence, but again, the intersections of different issues, and realizing that the the denial of access to resources is also inherently violent. The fact that students go to schools that are heavily policed but don't have access to AP courses or don't have access to after school programs is all inherently violent. So I think, especially in this time after the tragic death of George Floyd, people are really having the conversation on what safety means and reimagining safety so that it's in a way that is founded on not only looking at physical safety, but also mental safety of students and of people in communities.
Mhm. Walk me through the discussion that's being had now from your perspective. A lot of people are talking about defunding the police, and that's a big conversation that's being had across the United States right now about defunding the police department. But more particularly, a part of that defunding is due to the fact that we also have police in schools. And for a person that works with young people and who is connected, talk to us about policing in schools and having police in schools. Are you a proponent of that? And if so, what parts do you like? What parts do you not like?
Mhm. Thank you for that. I think I've definitely been having that sort of in a conversation with myself about policing in schools and the militarization of students. And for starters, I don't think we need police in schools for students to be safe. So I live in the Bronx, but I went to school in Lower Manhattan, and my experiences in comparison to the students in my zone school were completely different. I went to a school that didn't have metal detectors, and I went to a school that had school resource officers, but they were very kind and everyone was friendly with them in comparison to other schools where they have metal detectors and they have school resource officers who may actually make the school environment hostile instead of making it a better and safe environment, which is what we think. I think a lot of people from a young age, even adults, associate safety with more policing and just like the militarization of students and community members. When in reality, safety doesn't have to be like that. I think with the defunding the NYPD, the other part of it that people are forgetting is that we're directly asking you to defund them because historically, New York State and this country has been cutting, making detrimental cuts to every other system to continue to fund the NYPD and the police departments. So we're asking you, the governor and the mayor, to defund the police, but actually invest in communities. And the reason why I'm saying invest instead of reinvest is because our communities were never invested in. We want youth services. We want to make sure that our teachers are equipped with skills and materials to be able to teach us. Like we want to make sure we have extracurricular activities. High school students, making sure they have like advanced placement courses. It's unacceptable that students are going to schools that don't have access to a lot of resources, but they have metal detectors and school resource officers. And even within the conversation of safety is looking at mental safety and like psychological safety and employing more counselors and social workers and psychologists and even nurses. There's so many students that go to school that don't even have nurses, but they have school resource officers. So it's really about priorities and what our country and specifically New York City is prioritizing with the well-being of not only our constituents, but also our students.
Are you satisfied with the fact that the progress is being made inside the school system, particularly when it comes to security measures and things of that nature? Because we have seen some security measures that have been taking place, particularly in Parkland. I'll go back to the the shooting that actually drove your organization to come to life. Talk to us, because the whole issue of metal detectors in schools, and what does that do for a young person's psyche?
Thank you for that. I think, even after the Columbine High School massacre, I think that was when America really started implementing school resource officers and metal detectors in general, because people at that time thought that this will stop school shootings instead of actually having legislation to prevent people from maintaining those guns and buying those guns, those automatic rifles, and those AK-47s. Instead of doing that, they decided to implement metal detectors and school resource officers. And as the years progressed from Columbine, I think everyone started to see how instead of implementing it in all public schools, it started to only be implemented in like lower income schools and Black and brown schools, which started to disproportionately impact the education system. And it directly ties to the school to prison pipeline. And the school to prison pipeline is just the funneling of students. Majority of the time is Black and brown students, is disabled students, and the students are part of the LGBTQ community, who are funneled outside of their classrooms into prison cells because they're criminalized, which has to do with metal detectors and school resource officers. And to specifically answer your question about metal detectors, they do not make the environment safe. I've never had a conversation with a young person that goes to a public school with a metal detector who felt that going through this system and going through that kind of screening made them feel safe and made them feel like welcome in the school environment. A lot of the times, there were stories about students who were late to class because of metal detectors, and their teachers weren't understanding of the fact that they had to go through that screening. A lot of the times, like, there are just um, specific things that occur during the screening of metal detectors that are just unjust. And a lot of students share with myself and my other members at Youth Over Guns about how unfair it is to see how schools in Lower Manhattan don't have to go through metal detectors at the same extent that schools in neighborhoods in the Bronx and neighborhoods across New York City that are Black and brown or low income have to go through. So metal detectors do not make the environment more safe. It actually contributes to it by making it more hostile.
Yeah. Let me get a little bit more about Youth Over Guns, because before we get a chance to get out of here, I do want people to have the opportunity to connect. So for somebody who doesn't know about some of the programs and some of the things that you do and having these conversations and really bringing some life to our young people, why don't you share?
Yes. So Youth Over Guns, we are doing amazing work. I think our work has changed a little bit. And I think everyone's work has changed a lot because of COVID-19 and because of the rise of Black Lives Matter movement. But you can check us out on Instagram and on Twitter at Youth Over Guns. And our website is youthoverguns.ny.org. We are not we are C3, so you can donate to us anytime. And yeah, we're just doing a lot of work. We actually have a report, the Orange Report, coming out. And we're just highlighting the victims of Black and brown people who were impacted by gun violence, whose stories oftentimes don't make the news. We're specifically focusing our energy now on Black trans women and the impact that has had, and how Black trans women are not protected in this world and in this country, and how it intersects with gun violence. So we're doing a lot of different work. A lot of our work now is really focused and driving on making sure the education system is equitable to all people, and ensuring that young people who look like us and even who don't look like us are in schools that are actually safe and providing resources for them.
So when we talk about these young people getting resources, I want you to spend a few seconds right before we break out of here, talking a little bit about funding young people, right? Because we do understand that we're in a time where budget cuts can come, but I just want to give you a quick opportunity to just talk about why funding youth is so necessary for you.
Yeah, it's extremely important as a young person to see services in our community, not only having youth services in our schools, which includes having extracurricular clubs, because a lot of the times, like, schools have to make cuts because they're not receiving as much funds to those programs and to those after school clubs that actually protect students from violence if they had a place to go. We're also looking at youth services in our community, so schools, students still have someplace to go. Looking at just educational resources, and all of that. I think it's really important that the education system is changed drastically to be founded on restorative justice and ensuring that students feel safe, not only like physically safe, but also psychologically.
Before we leave, we want to make sure our audience has an opportunity to get connected.
Yeah, you can check us out on social media at Youth Over Guns. And if you want to join or get involved, you can go to youthoverguns.ny.org.
All righty. Well, Alliyah, we're going to wrap it there. Thank you so much
Thank you
for
so much.
being with us here. And we certainly thank you for sharing with us on Bronx social justice. Listen, we got more show. We want you to stay with us. We'll be right back coming up right after this.